I'm the Director of International Relations at Silicon Valley Forum in San Jose. Silicon Valley Forum is a part of the SVO, and we're very excited about that partnership and everything that it brings to both of our worlds. And with that, I'd love to hand it over briefly to Matt Mehud, the President and CEO of the SVO, to say hello.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate the warm welcome. And good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Mehud. I'm President and CEO of the Silicon Valley Organization, or as we affectionately call it, the SVO. And it's great to be here to help welcome you to this webinar, Agtech Startups in the Time of COVID-19. Just really quick, earlier this year, just prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and the shelter in place, the SVO merged operations with Silicon Valley Forum. And we are now operating as one organization, with Silicon Valley Forum being one of several of the SVO's business lines. And if you didn't know it, the SVO is the oldest and largest chamber of commerce in Silicon Valley. We are a 1,200 member business-based member organization that is driven by the fundamental belief that when businesses succeed, our communities thrive. And we serve our members in our community by being a catalyst for business growth, a convener of leaders and influencers, and a champion for a stronger community. And we really do this work in 5 specific areas: by creating unique networking and visibility opportunities, being a pro-business public policy and advocate, doing economic development focused on business retention, expansion, and startups, community advancement in the area of workforce development, education, and leadership training, and lastly, political action, helping local candidates get elected to pro-business candidates get elected to office. So if you're not a member of the SVO, we encourage you to check us out. Send a message to Nick, to Denise, to Amanda, who are on this call via chat box, or learn more by going to the SVO's website at thesvo.com. So we're happy you're here. We love the partnership and the arrangement that we put together with Silicon Valley Forum, and we hope you enjoy today's webinar. So with that, I'll kick it back over to Nick. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. And one thing that I'm really excited about is our most recent initiative, which is to bring more startups into the SVO community by creating startup membership tiers and ways in which startups in our networks can network, can communicate, can improve their businesses through the SVO network. So thank you, Matt, for all your support. So just really quickly before we dive into the conversation here, a few pieces of housekeeping. Even though this is set up as a webinar, we want to make it as entertaining and interactive as possible. So please feel free to drop any questions you have into the chat box. I'll be monitoring that as we go along. So there's a chat function down there. If you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the Q&A box, and we'll answer those throughout the program. So if you have any pressing issues, questions, concerns, comments about what's happening in the world of ag tech startups, feel free to drop it in there at any time. Also, we will be recording this, and as you can see from the icon on the top left, we are recording, and that's obviously as a way to bring this to audiences far and wide, Asia, those that are just getting out of bed in Hawaii, and others that are in our extended network. So feel free to spread this to your network as it becomes available in the next day or so as a recording. I know there has been a lot of interest in learning more about what's happening with the fires in Northern California right now, and as I mentioned briefly, it's ravaging our communities in many ways, as well as our agriculture communities. So if there is interest from your side in supporting farm workers in the Central Valley that are impacted by the fires, I just dropped a GoFundMe link, nothing to do with the SVO or Silicon Valley Forum, but it is towards a good cause of helping the families of farm workers that are impacted the most from the fires that are happening right now. So with that, we are going to kick it off with our moderator for today, Amy. Amy Wu is an award-winning writer for the women's ag and ag tech movement. She's the founder and chief content director of From Farms to Incubators, which is a multimedia platform that uses documentaries, videos, photography, and the written word to tell the stories of women leaders and innovators in ag tech. It has a mission of highlighting women in food, farming, and farm tech, especially women of color. From Farms to Incubators includes a documentary and a forthcoming book that spotlights women leaders in ag and ag tech. That will be published in early 2021. The documentary and stories have been screened and presented at South by Southwest and Techonomy, and the initiative was awarded grants from the International Center of Journalists and the International Women's Media Foundation's Howard G. Buffett Foundation, or a fund. In 2020, Amy was named on Worth Magazine's Groundbreakers 2020 list of 50 women changing the world list. Prior to starting From Farms to Incubators, Amy spent over 2 decades as an investigative reporter at media outlets, including the USA Today, where she reported on agriculture and ag tech for Salinas, California. She's also worked at Time Magazine, The Deal, and contributed to the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. So no one better to kick off this conversation than Amy herself, who's will get to the heart of some of these issues that are that are front and center in the ag tech world in 2020. And with that, Amy, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Nick, for that excellent introduction. I'm really honored to be your moderator at the Seeds of the Future virtual event organized by the Silicon Valley Forum. So a happy Tuesday, no matter where you are around the world globally. So along with a few housekeeping things that Nick mentioned, so we're gonna open the session with a series of questions. I'm gonna introduce the speakers, the special guests that we have today, and then we will definitely be leaving time today for your questions as well, that you should please feel free to type your questions and comments in the chat box throughout the event. And if you share information about today's webinar, which we would absolutely love, please feel free to tag hashtag Silicon Valley Forum. So with that, we're going to start. So at no other time, arguably, is the topic of agriculture and technology so important. Growers already challenged by climate change, severe labor shortage, water and land supply shortage, and the depletion of arable land have already steadily been turning toward innovation and technology. This includes blockchain, automation, and robotics. And growers also face the challenge of producing food for what is expected to be a population of about 9 billion people by 2050. So we are now fast moving toward a more technologized society, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. We've already seen this in medicine, education, and in the way that we work. So what impact, if any, will COVID and post-COVID society have on the way technology innovation plays out in investment in the ag tech sector? The events of the past few months have turned the startup world on its head. As venture capitalists shift their efforts to supporting their portfolio companies during these challenging times, funds are signaling a pullback in funding, and we've seen a significant decrease in valuations. However, we've seen that in the ag tech sector, there have been quite a few investments, in fact, and there seems to be a willingness to invest in the technology that support growers. So with that, I am really thrilled to introduce our 2 special guests today. We have Miku Jiha, a female entrepreneur who has created innovations to help growers and those in the food systems. She is a passionate entrepreneur and product executive with a proven track record. She's led multiple startups from founding stage to successful acquisitions and mergers with companies such as IBM. And also at AgShift, her current startup, she manages a team of data scientists, researchers, and technologists driven by a single passion to digitize the food supply chain with cutting-edge innovations in deep learning and data science. She has an MBA from Cornell University and a bachelor's degree in computer science from the University of Mumbai. She also comes from a fourth-generation family farm in northern India where they grew mangoes, and I'm sure she can share more about this later on. We also have with us Jason Aramburu. He's an investor with Aramco Energy Ventures based out in San Francisco. Prior to that, he was a director at Baidu Ventures. He's also an entrepreneur. He's founded a number of companies, including Eden, an irrigation system that monitors and tracks environmental conditions, and Rechair, a developer of biochair agriculture systems to mitigate climate change. He's an alumni of the Y Combinator program and has a bachelor's degree in ecology, evolutionary biology, renewable energy, and environmental studies from Princeton. We're going to be really excited to learn a little bit more about that. So I'm going to kick this off with this question. First, a personal check-in with both of you. How have you been doing personally? How are you managing your own well-being during this unusual time? Want to start with that, Miku?
If I have to be honest, things have been tough, especially in California. We thought we have seen the worst with COVID, and then we have fires, and then we have thunders, and we have lightning. But I think overall, it has accelerated the growth and learning for us as a company, and for me as an entrepreneur. Whatever I would have learned in the normal course over many, many years, it has been action-packed in last 6 months from March, when COVID became a reality. And a lot of our customers in food tech, whom we were actively working on, had to take a pause because of the situations. And we are still just starting to come back from that. We haven't fully come back yet. But it has been a learning experience as an entrepreneur and as a young startup on how to deal with something which you are never really prepared for, but you still have to get up and show up and continue executing.
And Jason, how have you been doing?
All things considered, I've been doing great. I think for me, it's given me a chance to spend more time with family while keeping up on work. And I think as an investor, there have been challenges and also opportunities. I think the big challenge is just a lot of our companies have seen demand for their products change as a result of shifting behaviors. But, I'm a firm believer in Darwinian principles. And I think COVID has also weeded out a lot of, bad business models, and it's weeded out a lot of unsustainable behaviors. Like, why do we need to drive to work every day? There's no reason for that. So I think, it's really been a mixed bag for me. I think also as an investor, it's in many ways, my throughput of deal flow has increased as a result of COVID. I think, with pitch meetings shifting from an hour-long in-person meeting to a 30-minute Zoom chat, I'm able to see and meet entrepreneurs all over the world that, might not have access to VC before. So I think, there's been challenges, but also a lot of interesting opportunities.
That's great to hear. So on the topic of navigating the current pandemic, which both of you have already touched upon a bit, so how has your day-to-day work been affected for each of you during COVID, and how are you shifting? Are you finding that that's had to shift now as the country has started to, in different places, reopen and some places close again? Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Some of these things which I'm sharing is very specific to us being focused in food and ag, which may or may not be applicable to other industry verticals. So for us, working from home as technologists, that is not a problem. We are able to manage that pretty efficiently and effectively. But the interesting thing is that, you know, we all assume, and with the data that we read, that, you know, food organizations and food companies are part of the essential businesses, so they are all open. That's what is true, but then the reality is that they still have cases, they have had cases, and in food it's more so than other industry verticals. So what is happening is that even though the processing facilities are open, they're not 100% operational. So there is a difference between the two things. So for companies like us, which are not the core of these organizations, right, which are providing services or solutions or doing projects or whatever else, there has been, you know, for the right mandatory reasons, for the right governance, a lot of those things have been paused. And this is true for many startups who have been working, who have been engaged with food supply chain organizations. So that part has been difficult, because for us, we have to be at the facility. Since we are an AI company, we have to work very closely to you know, monitor the data, monitor the patterns, talk to inspectors. So there, it has been difficult, despite the fact that we are in food and things are operational. It's not so for many other ancillary aspects of the business. And we create a lot of jobs for on-field site operators who have to go there and, you know, do the data collection for AI and fine-tune things. So there, you know, again, there are these nuances of, you know, when do we make a call that they should not go? What happens if there is a case of somebody working at the facility? Do we pull back? Do we not? So, but plowing through all of that, I think the positive has been that food companies now, you know, this awareness to at least augment the manual processes with technology, with innovation. There is a heightened awareness for that in the light of what is happening, and we are able to be on the table with many more customers compared to before, because they're very open now to saying, okay, what is it that you can do for us? What is it that I can benefit from investing in digitization and automation, so that at least long term I am better prepared for what has happened to my business over the last 5 months. And that, I think, is, you know, one positive for you know, any company which is investing in pushing that envelope of digitization and automation for food ecosystem. So I would say long term we are very happy about this aftermath. Short term there are difficulties, but, you know, we will plow through it. We are entrepreneurs, we are startups, we don't have a choice. We will get and overcome that.
That's really positive. Thanks for sharing that, Miku. So Jason, on your end, I'm hearing that things are getting busier. You're meeting with more investors. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, things have gotten busier and also changed a bit. I think one of the big trends that I've noticed is just since, you know, the traditional way that VC worked in the Bay Area before is, you know, you would get a warm introduction to a VC from, you know, some third party. And that was often sort of the gatekeeper to getting to a pitch meeting. And, you know, from an inclusivity perspective, I've always felt that that behavior creates an unnecessary barrier. I don't think it leads to better quality deal flow. I think instead it marginalizes a lot of people and entrepreneurs who don't have a really extensive contact base in Silicon Valley. And so I always found that behavior and that process, both as an investor and an entrepreneur, unsustainable. And what I've seen with COVID is that that's largely, it's going away increasingly. You know, now seemingly everyone's on the same footing. And I'm finding that myself and a lot of other VCs are much more willing to take cold outreach, respond to cold emails, rather than sort of, you know, requiring a known party to make the introduction. And I think, you know, that allows a lot of people who wouldn't have had a shot at getting VC to get it now, or at least to get into that first pitch meeting, which I think is a net positive. And one other just shift I've noticed is that because all the meetings are on Zoom now, we're able to just have more during the day. The 1 hour in-person meeting is really shifting to a 30-minute Zoom conversation, which ultimately makes me busier, increases my deal flow, which is great. And I will say, one of the changes that is more unfortunate is just some of the serendipity of being in the Bay Area is lost a little bit. You can't really run into another VC and grab lunch and chat. Everything sort of has to be pre-planned in that regard. It used to be that you could just kind of go to a coffee shop in South Park in San Francisco and you would run into 10 other VCs and catch up. Obviously that's not happening now. So, that has changed. You have to make time for one-on-ones with other investors, but, for me, largely, yeah, my deal flow is increasing and I feel busier than ever.
Also really positive. Thanks for sharing that,
Mm-hmm.
Jason. So I was reading recently in the Silicon Valley Business Journal that there's actually a boom in ag tech and food tech funding, especially like the first half of the year. And some of this includes like 6 Bay Area deals. So I'm wondering, how do you feel ag tech investors have responded like to the current events? And either one of you can jump in first. Yeah.
I'll let Jason go first this time.
Yeah, I would say, at least at the early stage, maybe investors are a little more risk averse at the early stage because it's kind of still unknown, how COVID is going to affect the ability to work in the agricultural context. I think there's still concern that regular business processes could be impacted by outbreaks over the next 12 months. So I think that's definitely a concern. So I think in general there's maybe more interest in kind of later stage deals that are already sort of proven out. I think also one of the challenges with ag tech investing is that oftentimes to really, maybe the product is a robot or a physical product or something, or a sensor, and to see it in action, to see a product demo, sometimes you have to go to a facility to see that. And I think that is challenging for a lot of VCs as well in the current climate. Obviously being a venture investor is a very privileged role, and I'm personally very grateful to be in that role. However, part of what is involved in being a VC is you just have to meet a lot of different people, and you have to visit a lot of different businesses and people, and that is risky in this climate. And so what I've seen is a lot of VCs are, they're less willing to make a site visit, for instance, and as a result, that can impact just the deals that they choose to fund. I think in general, they're, maybe it's easier for a lot of VCs, say, to fund a software business where you could really do a demo over Zoom and get customer feedback over the phone, versus something where you would really have to go in person and potentially put yourself or your family at risk. So that is kind of one shift that I'm seeing right now.
Very interesting. Miku, what are you seeing, and where are you now with fundraising?
Yes, I think I agree with Jason. Even without COVID, early stage ag tech or food tech companies have a lot more to prove because of the mindset of the industry vertical, the products, the dependency on the seasonality, having the need to go to the facilities or the farms. So there are all these intricacies of being in Agtech, and early stage, it is difficult. We are in a we would say we are in a late seed stage startup. We are not very early. We are a revenue positive company, but still, I think there is that uncertainty in the investment committee, because and that uncertainty comes from not having a very good handle on how food supply chain is preparing to respond to the changing dynamics, short term or long term. So it also depends on what you're doing as a company, what aspect of food supply chain you are touching. For us, we work with processors, so we are more in the supply chain aspect of it, and supply chain is going through its own turmoil as we speak. So so it has been a little bit, I would say, more difficult than normal, given the stage we are at. And what Jason touched upon as investors, I'm seeing a lot of that with customers too, because for us, even to get to new customers, since we have a physical system, like you pointed out, Jason, we have a physical analyzer, and even to get that initial interest and initial conversation, either the customer has to come to our labs and see the systems, or we have to find a way to host them to some other customer's facility where the system is operational. And any of those options are currently difficult to do. So that has impacted quite a bit. Obviously, there are ways to do it remotely, to do it over Zoom, but it's a different experience, especially since we have a system. They want to touch and feel the system. They want to put their own strawberries or their own almonds and see how it works, how the AI does. And so some of those things have been difficult. Like we have been trying to host one customer into our lab to show them how the system could work potentially for their commodity, and for the right reasons we haven't been able to overcome that hurdle for almost 6 weeks. So I would say that for young startups, it's more about figuring out how to handle this change in interaction with customers and potential opportunities and projects. If we can put that in place, more or less, the investor part would be easier, because all the proof points are coming from your projects, your customers, and how do you establish the ROI and value for them. So that's the part which I think for any startup, they have to think through this, because this is, even if the immediate numbers are improved for whatever we are looking at COVID, there is a long-term shift in the mindset, and we have to figure out how we come up with different ways. For example, we came up with a way where we requested one of our customer to host another potential customer who are in a very close geographic proximity, right? To say, could you help us with that? We can't be there. We can't host them here. Could you give us 1 hour so that they can visit the facility and see how the system works? So that's just one example, but I think we have to get really, really creative in overcoming this hurdle, at least for the second half of 2020 of this year, and not lose those opportunities. And then I think things would be in place.
So looking into the future, although it's hard to sort of see what's inside the crystal ball sometimes, especially during these times, Jason, where are startups thriving? Like, let's focus on food tech, ag tech, ag bio. Where do you see startups potentially thriving, in which areas under those, those 3 areas, and why? Do you have any specific examples?
Yeah, well, I think right now with COVID, there's just a general consumer sentiment and interest towards food safety. So I think, any startups that are kind of able to validate the safety of a food product and pass that on to the consumer, there's going to be demand for those solutions. I think also what I'm seeing is a lot of demand for automation, both on the farm, but also for indoor ag, for packing, because we're seeing that really, one of the weak points in the food supply chain is anywhere where you have, humans in close contact with each other. And so, I think there will continue to be massive interest in robotics and automation, really, in all sectors of the food value and supply chain. And we're just now starting to see the technology, I think, catch up with that demand, particularly on like the harvesting side. So I think those sectors are really exciting. And then always any, pure play software businesses, where, that you don't have to physically touch the customer or be with the customer. I think those sectors will continue to be very strong through the pandemic, and as things change. So that's been kind of my observation.
Miko, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I would say that any kind of automation or digitization which can augment the manual workforce, those solutions now have a heightened interest from the food supply chain ecosystem, because it's not just short term. It's not just to get through what we are all facing. Also, from the long term perspective, I think it was long due that technologists and entrepreneurs can bring all the aspects of innovation to help address some of the problems which have always been there in this entire supply chain ecosystem. But where you would face blockers is in the mindset of this vertical, which is a little different than the other industry verticals. So I think that has started to kind of crack, in the sense that, like I said, we are in a much better position where we can reach out to a customer and they're willing to give us their half an hour and see what if it has any value, as opposed to before. I've seen a lot of change, even if I compared, because mindset is the most important thing. If that openness is not there, then it doesn't matter how great a technology is. If you're not willing to be open to considering it, then it doesn't help whether I'm doing computer vision or world's most sophisticated AI. It does not really hold weight. But even compared to 2016 or early 2017, when we started AgShift, if I compare that time frame to today, there is a clear change. We are able to talk to customers. We are able to show them what we can do. There is still resistance. There is still this hesitancy to, okay, I have to change my processes and operations, which have been like this for many decades, to something completely disruptive. But it's like, okay, let me give it a try, right? You're not gonna change the mindset in overnight, right? No, it doesn't matter. It's not a game of technology. But before, it was like, no, we are fine the way we are, to today, where the feeling, the meetings, what we get is that, okay, can I try it? And if it works for me, I'm open to considering it. And I think that's a huge leap. That's a huge leap for both ends of the equation. It helps entrepreneurs to start being comfortable in investing their time, effort in coming up with automation and digitization solutions, as long as they feel that at least they are getting the honest audience to try out their solution and assess it for whatever value it offers.
That's great. So I want to move a little bit further into the future again. What excites you about, I'm hearing there's a lot of potential opportunities, possibilities in all different aspects, both the investment and also the technology, and also obviously the needs of growers. But what excites you about this next period in history?
Well, for me, one sector within ag that I'm really excited about and where I'm seeing kind of an explosion of startups, and I think savvy investors are starting to dip their toes in the water as well, is regenerative agriculture or carbon farming. The idea of building businesses and technologies where farmers are incentivized to sequester carbon in their soil or adopt practices that accrete and sequester carbon. And I think, that's, I personally think it's an opportunity that's bigger than big oil. We have billions of acres of degraded land around the world. Our soil actually has about 14 times more carbon in it than the atmosphere does. And, depending on who you ask, it could store hundreds of times more carbon than is in the atmosphere. So I think it's just a massive opportunity. And I think, we're starting to develop the frameworks and the incentives that will encourage farmers to adopt these technologies. I think the technologies are getting better and better to the point where they can almost seamlessly integrate with the farm's operations. And the future there, I think, is really technologies that require almost no extra effort on behalf of the farmer and can sequester potentially billions of tons of CO2 and also increase and improve the economics of agriculture. A lot of people who aren't in the space day to day don't really realize that, the margins are very thin in agriculture, particularly in row crop agriculture. The margins are they're very often negative, but when they are positive, we're talking single digit dollars per acre that these farmers are making. And so, anything that can put more money into a farmer's pocket without really impacting their operations, I think is a win-win. So I'm very excited about that whole sector.
So before we move on to Miku, your response, I understand, Jason, that you recently started like a new venture. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit about that, and where are you focusing your ag tech investments?
Yeah. So I, much of my career has been in the biochar space, which is a technology for carbon sequestration and for regenerative agriculture. The idea with biochar is that you can take waste, agricultural waste, biomass waste, or wood waste, convert it to charcoal, and then bury that charcoal in the soil. It actually improves the nutrient retention and water retention of the soil. And when done on a very large scale, it actually has the potential to sequester billions of tons of CO2. One of the big challenges with biochar is getting it to scale and actually transporting and collecting all that biomass that you would actually need to make that kind of impact. And so I've been working with a colleague on a new technology, which we'll be announcing more about in the coming weeks and months, where rather than have to collect billions of tons of biomass, transport them to a centralized facility and produce biochar, and then take billions of tons of biochar back out to the farm, we're actually building a system that goes directly to the farm, collects the biomass and converts it to biochar on site, and then redeposits it back in the field. And that has the potential to really fundamentally alter the economics of regenerative agriculture and biochar, and actually make it something that every farmer could adopt. So yeah, that's been a really, really exciting project as well.
Well, it's exciting. Looking forward to hearing more about that in the future. So Miku, what excites you about this next period in the industry?
So for me and for us as AgShift, I think it's the same thing on day zero when we started, which was to reduce food waste, and it's even more acute now than ever before. I come from India, and we have lived in the world where at one end of the spectrum there are issues with food security, and at the other end of the spectrum we have massive food waste. And in one of my blogs I was sharing that mathematically it doesn't make sense. That should not be the equation, which is the premise on which we started AgShift. That we have talked a lot about growing more food to feed, the growing population, but maybe an easier way is to focus some of our time, attention, and energies on reducing reducing waste of what we are already growing. And what we are excited about is that with AgShift, we are able to tie this vision of reducing food waste with actual solutions, with products which can help the businesses in their day-to-day operations, help them improve the quality of food, help them improve the margins. Because if they're able to assess that, quality from farm A is better than quality from farm B, then they're able to pay that farm better, because it's directly tied to that tangible metric, which is the quality. So that way, growers are able to be in a better situation. And overall, this is just like healthcare diagnostics. If you are preemptive about finding issues in the food, then you're that much reducing the possibilities of that shipment being rejected at the last mile and getting into claim management, which for perishables, it ends up contributing to almost 34% of food waste. So if you look at statistics, 34% of the total food waste is attributed to the flow in the supply chain, that is post-harvest to the time it makes it to the consumers or the retail store. And that's a fat pipe. 34% is very, very high. And a lot of that is attributed to inconsistencies in quality assessments, or not having, because you have different players. Food supply chain is pretty fragmented. No single entity controls everything. And no one is speaking the common language because you don't have standardization. So if you can start applying technology to improve this further, where we talk the same language with AI, it is possible that you have a single pair of eyes which is looking at that food as it moves through the supply chain. So with bringing all this together, we are able to quantifiably reduce the percentage of rejection which happens in the last mile. And we're not saying that that will that will eliminate food waste, but the point is, with 100% of our efforts, if we can reduce that 33% to 1% also, that's exciting enough for me as a person and for us as a company. Let's just aim for a low-hanging fruit. Let's aim for 1% reduction of that 33%, and we are very happy if we can achieve that.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking at the time, and we're going to move into some questions from our audience out there. And please, as a reminder, type your questions into the chat box, or any comments that you have as well.
You have a few already, actually, Amy, that
Great.
came through. So one of them came from Bobby, and this is probably a question best addressed by Miku. And Bobby's asking, going forward, supply chains in agriculture are expected to become more resilient, yet borders are expected to become more restrictive. So how will Agtech help reconcile these two opposite trends? And Miku, the answer, number one, of course, is AgShift. What about number two? What else do you think would help solve this problem?
So I think, when you bring digitization or automation to a certain process, which is manual or which doesn't benefit that much, I truly believe that, it's not so much dependent on the borders or practices. There are certain things like gap practices or whatever, which are very specific to a region or a geo. But a pure digitization or automation, for example, you're doing something, and using technology, you can improve that operational efficiency to 5x or 6x. Then whichever region or geo you want to take the solution to, I think it will have that adoption. So for example, when we work on a certain commodity, right? Like let's say we apply AI to automate the quality inspection for almonds or cashews, right? Now, it does not matter, because at the end of the day, it's a natural product. So an almond in California, Bakersfield, is not that different than an almond in some growing region in Australia, for example. So the core of the solution, I think it remains adaptable. What might change is that how you interpret that accept reject decisions or quality, that might be different for a processor in Bakersfield compared to a processor in Australia. But it still works pretty well. That has been our experience, that if you start out with the solution which is generic enough, then it can go beyond the boundaries of different geo requirements, and you can tune it, because at the end of the day, this is very surprising, but it's not very different. What we do here with our customers in US, a lot of that resonates with even customers with whom we worked. For example, on cashews, we worked with somebody in Vietnam. There was one subtle difference though. So again, it depends on what kind of solutions you're focusing on. Like we talk a lot about in US, uh, access to labor is hard, at least in California, right? And the cost is high, right? So labor costs are a difficult metric. As we know, these are businesses with very thin operative margins. Now that same argument does not hold true for Asia, right? You have access to labor and it's not expensive. So if that is the value prop you have, then you're going to have difficulty. But if you're able to say that I'm still able to improve your operational efficiencies, manually you're doing something in 15 minutes, I can help you do that in 1 minute, that holds true regardless of the boundaries. So I think it depends a lot on what the solution is, but you have to frame it correctly for the region where you're taking the solution to. Like it will never work if I went to where I'm from, some region in India, and said access to labor or the cost are the metric. That's not true. It will not work.
Great. Jason, anything to add to that about that push and pull between resiliency of our food systems and restrictiveness due to COVID?
Well, I think, just talking about kind of resiliency in food systems, I think one big trend that we've all seen in ag tech is kind of the alternative protein, the growth of that sector. Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, oat milk, just kind of an explosion of products there, which is really exciting because, I think dairy processing and meat processing are a real at-risk supply chain for COVID, as we've seen. A lot of meat processors have had to shut down due to COVID. I think, though, as investors, we are trying to balance our optimism and excitement about those products with, like actual demand on the ground. And my personal belief is that I think the sector is a little bit frothy right now. There's the challenge with food companies is you are subject to the demands of the consumer, which change so quickly and oftentimes are seemingly irrational. And I think, despite all the successes and growth in that sector that we're seeing, and, the potential to move protein away from this kind of dangerous supply chain, I think there will be, from an investment perspective, a lot of losses as well. Again, just the problem with a consumer-facing product is you have to make the inventory and produce it kind of before whether people will buy it or not. And I tend to shy away from those businesses as an investor personally, unless I'm really sure that consumers want to buy the product. And one proof point that I'm just not seeing yet in the alternative protein sector is like a really devoted group of kind of, call them lifestyle vegetarians, or people who were vegetarian before this sector came to market saying, yeah, I love the Impossible Burger, I eat it every day. And I'm personally not seeing that data. And it leads me to wonder, whether these products have really cracked the code yet, and whether, it really is going to be something that consumers will buy on a weekly basis and eat day to day. I just don't know yet. And so that's why I'm, sort of more cautiously optimistic about that sector. But in the context of COVID, I think it's fantastic that we are experimenting with alternate supply chains for protein.
So Jason, I'm 100% vegetarian, and
Nice.
I'm not converting to Impossible Burgers.
Yeah.
One data point for you.
Right. There you go.
So, Amy, do you want me to continue, or do you want to take off a couple of these?
I see one question, and I think this question is for Jason on terms of with biochar. What opportunities do you see for startups relating to biochar? And then another one, can one produce biochar from coal?
Yeah, a great question. So no, you can't produce biochar from coal. You can only really make biochar from biomass. So wood or agricultural waste like crop waste, stalks, corn stubble, things like that, sawdust. You can also make it from like poultry litter. That's a very common feedstock. So that's a mix of, basically chicken poop and straw. Anything that has a biological origin, generally you can make biochar from. To the other question, what opportunities? The biochar sector is really just getting started. It's really like I've been working in the space about almost 15 years now in biochar, and from when I started to now, every year you look at the tons of biochar that were shipped and sold, and it's just steadily increasing. It's a sector where we really had to spend a lot of time educating people. I mean, still, most people have never heard of biochar, but increasingly, farmers are starting to learn about it, understand the benefits, and are starting to want it. Also, there's now, government subsidy for biochar. In California, farms that use biochar that meet certain standards can qualify for a subsidy of up to $6,000 per acre to use this technology. So that's really exciting. So I think there's still tremendous opportunities in the space. What's really needed are the production systems. Although making charcoal is something that humans have been doing for thousands of years, most charcoal making systems are only designed to work with wood the fresh wood that's been cut to a certain size. And that's actually not the most desirable feedstock to make biochar. You want to make biochar from waste, and waste comes in different sizes, densities, compositions. And so building out biochar production systems that can handle suboptimal waste streams is a huge opportunity. And it's a capital intensive sector for sure. This is heavy machinery, heavy equipment, but honestly, there's never been a better time to get funding for capital intensive business. I think VCs are increasingly willing to invest in hard tech businesses. There's also a lot of opportunities in biochar around the blending and building the biochar products. It's not the biochar itself is only part of the equation. You also want to combine it with fertilizers or compost or manure to really build like a customized product for the needs of a particular grower. And so I think coming up with really innovative blends that work for particular agricultural applications and patenting those is a really exciting opportunity also. And that's an area where I think once production capacity catches up, that will grow as well. And then lastly, I think just building the infrastructure for offsets and incentives to farmers is really interesting also. One of the biggest or one of the most successful frameworks there is developed by Indigo Ag, the seed company. You have to use their seeds, obviously, but if you use their seeds and can show carbon sequestration as a farmer, they'll actually pay you for that. And that's a nationwide program now. So I think, startups that can come up with a framework for incentives for regenerative agriculture and for monitoring will also be very exciting over the next few years.
That's great.
Great.
Nick, are there any more?
There's another one here, and Jason touched on the other side of this briefly, but I think the question about early stage and seed funding is quite interesting. So I think, Jason, we spoke about this separately, about how investors are becoming or not becoming more comfortable with writing checks without the in-person meeting. So you mentioned before that later stage ag tech companies are getting traction still because they have a proven business model and they have existing relationships that started with a handshake and a couple of in-person meetings. What about first time in capital raise? Are we seeing a lot of action in that side, or are investors holding back a bit?
I think investors are starting to get more comfortable with, writing checks without an in-person meeting. Still, for pre-seed funding, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, or even if you're not, usually the best way to go is to go like through an accelerator program, because most accelerators have been doing kind of remote interviews already. So for a lot of the big ones, it's nothing new to them. They'll write you $100,000 or $150,000 check kind of without needing extensive in-person meetings. So I think if you're kind of earlier in your career or first-time entrepreneur, that's probably the best way to go, because then you kind of get their stamp of approval as well and can connect with their investor base. So I think in the absence of the first in-person meeting, having kind of that stamp of approval is becoming more valuable. Still, most VCs who do pre-seed investing, and when I say pre-seed, that means kind of before you've really built the product. Maybe you have an idea or a business plan. Still, most of those deals are going to entrepreneurs who have a track record already, who either have built a large company before or worked at a successful startup before. So I think in the absence of being able to kind of develop that gut feel about an entrepreneur through the in-person meeting, kind of credentialing in that regard is becoming more important. And I feel like for pre-seed, that will probably continue. I don't know that many VCs that will invest pre-seed into a first-time entrepreneur, without some other proof points or data. But the flip side, if you have something that is working and you've kind of gotten into a good accelerator and have that stamp of approval, then yeah, you can, seed rounds, multi-million-dollar seed rounds are closing without an in-person meeting every day. So I think, particularly for earlier stage entrepreneurs, that would be my recommendation. Go through kind of an established channel first, get some early data, build your product, and then go out for your seed round. Unless you're someone who has just a really strong track record, then yeah, you may be able to raise a big pre-seed round today.
Great. Well, looks like we are running out of time here. So I guess I wanted to have some final words from both of you, Miku and also Jason as well. So what would be some of your final words? Like, what are you most looking forward to or hopeful about right now in terms of both ag tech and also ag tech investment?
For us, it's just continue to believe in our vision, which is much bigger than us, and continue to execute on an everyday basis and make sure it happens, that over the coming time frame, few months or whatever, we are able to quantifiably prove to the food supply chain and prove to ourselves and rest of the world that you can truly bring something to life and at the same time reduce the goal we started with, which is to reduce food waste with a quantifiable percentage. And we will continue doing that regardless of what comes in our way, whether it's COVID, whether it's fires, whether it's lightning, it does not matter, and it will not matter to what we are doing, because our vision is very true, and we will keep at it.
I continue to be really excited about businesses in ag tech that leverage just some of the incredible advances in the past 5 years in computer vision and robotics. We're now at a point where, it really is possible, for instance, for a robot to harvest produce with the same accuracy and often better accuracy and speed than a human. And, if you've spent any time on a specialty crop farm in, say, California, a lot of the laborers and the workers, I mean, they're very good at what they do. I mean, it's very hard to beat them, and robots are now doing that. So I think, to me, that's just really exciting. Creates massive opportunities to change the economics of agriculture. As I mentioned before, I'm just also really excited about regenerative agriculture and carbon farming. I think it's kind of the next frontier in ag. And I think COVID has shown a lot of people that, we can take on these very large existential crises, that collective action is powerful and technology is powerful. And I think COVID has also shown us kind of what happens when you're not prepared for a crisis, or when the response is not executed well. And so I think as we look at the looming climate crisis, a lot of entrepreneurs and folks in government are saying, well, this is something we're not prepared for today. It's coming whether we like it or not, whether we believe it or not, it's going to happen. And we need to prepare. We need to invest in technologies to prepare, because they may take 20 years to mature. And so to me, that's really exciting. And it's something that, I think hasn't been much in the collective consciousness until now.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you both. Thanks for sharing your insight, your vision, and thank everybody out there for joining us. And please check back to the Silicon Valley Forum's homepage and Facebook page for the latest updates, and also join us tomorrow for part 2 of the Agtech discussion. So with that, well, farewell.
Thank you so much, Amy. Really appreciate it. Yes, and as Amy mentioned, we're having part 2 of this discussion tomorrow. The topic will be how to build resiliency in our food systems using technology. So, a lot of the themes we touched on today will go a little more in depth tomorrow. So that should be an excellent discussion. Amy, Jason, Miku, thank you so much for your time today. This was a very insightful conversation, and look forward to staying in touch in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.